Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com, and today I'm talking with you about choosing timelines and shifting timelines. This whole subject has been very popular, especially with the idea of quantum jumping, reality shifting, and it's been gaining traction recently. So it's a good moment in time to take a look at what is a timeline and what do we mean by this usage of jumping timelines, shifting timelines, choosing timelines. Essentially, what we're talking about with timelines is the concept that when you look, for example, at a timeline of a given day, there are a sequence of events that we can generally agree occurred in a sequential manner. This is what we refer to as linear time. So there'd be something that happens in the morning, for example, such as you wake up and brush your teeth, get up, get out of bed, shower, change, so forth. And then later in the day, you might eat, of course, have something to eat, do your job, work, visit with friends, so forth. And so the sequence of events is generally unquestionable. Typically, we tend to assume with conventional timelines that these are very linear, very much unchanging. However, in this time, when a lot of us feel like we don't have the same level of choices that we used to have, and we have awareness now that you can jump and shift between timelines, that becomes very exciting. And so this is work that's usually happening between levels of consciousness. Typically, it happens at such a low level of consciousness, subconscious, that we're not thinking about it at all. When we engage our consciousness, then, at a higher level, that we might have a to-do list, for example. If we're choosing to allow our higher self, our intuition, run the show today, then you're giving your to-do list to the subconscious and you're saying, okay, I have a to-do list, but if there's something that comes up and I see synchronicities, I witness indicators that there's an adjacent available timeline of some sort that feels fantastic, then I might be making a jump at any given point. So it's a very, it's a level of consciousness, kind of an activity. And this gets into what is consciousness in the first place. A lot of us assume that when you say I, you know who you're talking about. That is a loaded concept. When we think of I, we're actually looking at a sense of selfhood. And what is that sense of selfhood? Where does it come from? It's assumed, it's automatic, it's subconscious. And as we mature into awareness that we can have feelings that we don't necessarily act on and so forth, and we can have higher levels of emotions such as gratitude and thankfulness and forgiveness and respect and reverence and ecstasy of just living and being in love with being alive. Those levels of awareness and self-awareness can be allowed to be given increasing roles in our daily lives. Even asking a simple question like how good can it get is enough to activate this process. So let's dive into a question that I received recently. I do get a lot of emails, and I do my best to respond to them. This one, I recently received this questions about timelines, which brought up the whole topic for me to realize, wow, let's dive into this. So the question is, on a metaphysical level, what is a timeline? How are they created, and do we create them, or are they already in existence? Because you teach about quantum jumping. I presume we can jump timelines, correct? But how were they created so we're able to jump them? I mean, can an individual create a timeline, or is it just the collective? I guess I wonder who created the dimensions as well. Okay, so we've talked about this conventional concept of timelines. Now let's and I touch briefly on this idea of metaphysical timelines or unconventional awareness of nonlinear timelines. Because the linear conventional timeline, that's what we're expecting. That's the moving finger writes and having writ moves on, nor all your piety nor wit can change a single line of it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's conventional. And that's typically what the Western sciences and schooling will instruct us, that that's all that ever happens. However, we get indicators, as I was suggesting and hinting at many times, that we have an adjacent available possible reality. What is that? Where does it come from? And was it there already? I would like to agree with some of the wisdom keepers from the indigenous traditions who say that the idea of original thinking, and there's an excellent book by that same title by the author Glenn Aparicio Perry. Original thinking is the idea that all thoughts, all ideas already exist. So if that's true, then that means all this potentia, these what in quantum physics we might consider them as just these smeared out probability waves, wave functions just smeared over all possible time and space. And they're not realized until there's an observer. Again, back to the observer, back to the identity. Who am I? What am I? And levels of observation have the power to shift what we observe. And we're starting to get laboratory verified evidence that even in a simple experiment like the double slit elegant experiment, it's been observed that two observers at the same place, same time, can and do witness completely different observations. These are observational devices. The experiment conducted was done in collaboration between a couple of universities in Edinburgh, Scotland, and in Vienna, Austria. So basically what they were noticing is with the 6 entangled photons they were watching moving through the double slit experiment, the two observational devices did not always observe the same thing. Now this was basically a reenactment or an experimental version of the Wigner's friend Gedanken experiment, thought experiment, which means that if there's an observer watching someone who's observing something, then what happens? What happens is you get different observations sometimes. And that is what we're witnessing when we see shifts in reality, when we experience the Mandela effect. So it's giving us a basis scientifically to recognize that there could be some additional phenomenon within nature herself that we can start to observe. And that gets exciting. So getting into this idea of individual versus collective shifts. When we look at how individuals can and do change and select timelines, and how are we doing that, again, this gets into that concept of the observer observing. We do this within ourselves, and I like this definition of consciousness that was originated by Leibniz, one of the two creators of calculus, basically. Notice that the ideas on our planet sometimes come up simultaneously, as if they have sort of this pre-existence. They're already there. What if calculus is already there? And I think it probably is. And so then you've got, on one hand, you've got the Newtonian view of this is calculus. Then you've also got Leibniz, the philosopher who I really admire so much for many of his ideas, including this one about consciousness, that you can have a second order of perceptual awareness observing a primary level of awareness. What does that sound like? It sounds like what I'm talking about with levels of, you could call it dimensional consciousness if you want to. You can see it when you look at a piece of paper and you've got flatland here. We're familiar with our 3 dimensions typically, so I can, if there was something concealed, like if there was a hidden, like a map or a maze, I could at a glance tell how a little 2-dimensional flatlander could quickly go to the answer, because I'm operating in a higher dimension. These levels of dimensional thought can take us higher than that. And what does that look like? That gets into some interesting topographies. We're not going to get into that right here, but enough to say it's exciting. So with these individual timelines, and we recognize, like I indicated, sometimes you'll sense there's an adjacent reality. You can start sensing that when you start asking questions like, how good can it get? When you start opening your ability to perceive that there might be an awareness and a reality where you've got more prosperity, better health, better relationships. These kinds of things I would recommend going for originally. Start with things that matter greatly to you, and also that you feel are attainable. Then you can start experiencing some of the sorts of reality shifts I often describe, and quantum jumps, where, for example, I've run out of nutmeg in my cupboard, and I know that if I shut the cupboard door, walk down the hall, come back to the kitchen, look again, open the cupboard, look again, I know if I keep doing that, and if I keep expecting I may see it, then this is an example of quantum jumping. This is how to recognize that when I go down that hallway, I'm aware that I can actually literally walk into another reality in my own home, so that when I come back to that cupboard, maybe on the 4th or 5th try, I think it was like the 5th try, the most recent time I did that one, then I opened the cupboard and there was exactly what I was looking for, the nutmeg, for example. So this is just a great way to start playing with reality in simple ways. I recommend go for things that your subconscious can believe might happen. If you'd like prompts so that you can start opening up what you think can happen, read some firsthand reports that I've documented for more than 20 years at realityshifters.com, and that can give you a good start. So when you sense these possible realities, it might come through as a dream or a daydream, might come through as high sense perception of some sort. You might start noticing that there had been a reality shift, something moved and you didn't move it. These are little hints, little indicators, because frankly, we're probably quantum jumping all the time. Pretty much any time a decision is made, we're actually in an adjacent possible reality. We're just sort of like hopping. We're constantly quantum jumping and reality shifting. What does that mean collectively? Well, if we consider that these pre-existing timelines are already out there, then sometimes on a collective level, we might notice that some of us are remembering things differently than what the official version of history might be. What does that sound like? It sounds like a Mandela effect. So you can think of it as something that's happening sort of like, wow, what's going on here? And we didn't initiate it exactly. Or you could think maybe in some cases, we might witness some beloved animals coming back from the brink of extinction, or from periods of time when they were definitely extinct and everyone agreed they were gone for hundreds of years and now they're back. These are the kinds of things we talk about on International Mandela Effect Conference, IMEC. We have open tables every month pretty much lately, and it's a live stream on YouTube, so you can join in and comment and be part of that process where we're actually looking at these animals that are what you might call manned animals. Many of them are extraordinary and perhaps indicators that we're collectively choosing a really good timeline where there is respect. And I've talked about these things previously with the idea of Rev humanism. It's basically an alternative to technocracy and transhumanism. Not that there's anything wrong with technology. Humans love technologies. Rather, it's an embracing of our awareness that we can be respectful and reverent toward one another. If you can think of it as this is a time of great awakening, then you can also recognize we have, some of us, really attained a level of awareness in our heart centers, and we're moving up. So with this dimensional consciousness shift, you'll find sometimes on a collective level that collectively we're learning to communicate with one another without going into drama, without blaming, without shaming, without guilt. How are we doing? Well, working on it. It's a work in progress, right? But ideally, we'll be getting to a place where we can speak with reverence to those we disagree with. We'll be able to recognize that we can speak into being our reality creation. We're not yet at a level where what we think manifests, because we are still, frankly, working on moving from this heart center to the throat. So that's where we are collectively. What does that look like with reality bubbles? Well, if each of us has this awareness that we have timelines adjacent to us, sometimes some of us recognize that we've got a timeline adjacent to a lot of us. And so some of our visionaries on the planet, you know them because they're working with technologies, right? So they're coming up with a bigger, better technology. But what about on the inside and the spiritual growth and evolution? You can recognize those of us who are doing that by the lightness and the joy and the higher levels of awareness that we're moving with, ideally, hopefully. And what does this do? It helps give all of humanity basically an open door. It starts like just a little crack in the door. Like, here's a reality where all of humanity can be in communion, in harmony with all of nature, that we can work together, be together, live together, that this can be an experience of mutual collaboration, cooperation. And so I've got some, I write these things up as blogs, so if you want to see a written version with some of the references and sources, you can definitely do that. And come to click the link here in the description for this video, and you can go to the blog, because there's a lot to this. A lot of sources. The book I mentioned, of course, Original Thinking by Glenn Aparicio Perry. I've had him on my podcast. He is great. That's Living the Quantum Dream on Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. And you can also read some of the papers I've written about subjective reality. I co-authored a great one with George Weissman, one of the hippies who saved physics, as featured in the book by the same title. And he and I wrote about basically the quantum paradigm and what does that look like? How does that feel? And can we live it, basically? Yes, we can live it. And what happens is it's an experience of this very subjective beingness. And getting into being, that's another topic for a whole other video, which I will do for you guys. And it's basically going to be delving into the ideas that were brought forth in the Language of Spirit conferences, of which Glenn Aparicio Perry played a big role. And these indigenous wisdom keepers got together with scientists and linguists and really explored the nature of reality. So until next time, keep asking, how good can it get? I hope your timeline jumps and choices are always good ones. Yes, we create them in the sense that we're voting for them and we're moving into them to physically embody and inhabit them. You can think of that as a vote, like, yep, I'm all in, and we go all in. Are these timelines already there? Yes. Do they fully exist, fleshed out, and inhabited? Not necessarily. If we don't like them, we're not going to inhabit them. And that's why it's so important, again, to keep asking, how good can it get? Till next time, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with realityshifters.com.